Hello, Shadowrick here. I've been getting a lot of questions lately regarding Aldrachi versus Fel Scarred and Mythic Plus, so I wanted to go and make a quick video kind of looking at the differences between the two, why I play both, and why I recommend different ones depending on the player. So, what I'm going to go over in this video is the strengths and the weaknesses of both Aldrachi Reaver as well as Fel Scarred, and I'll also mention which dungeons I prefer each one in. To start with, we'll start with Aldrachi Reaver. This has been the default option and what most people have been playing up until this point. So, let's start with the strengths. When it comes to Aldrachi Reaver, it does have the stronger single target damage of the two options, and it has funnel damage. And what funnel damage is when more targets increase your damage to your primary target. That gives us an incredible amount of priority target damage, arguably the best in the game, at least top 2 with Arcane Mage. Um, and this is also not just in cooldowns, it's just anytime you have a Reaver's Glaive, your next Blade Dance will do a significant amount of funnel damage, as the physical damage is funneled into your main target through Wounded Quarry. Defensively, if it is used optimally around Burst, then it is stronger. This is because the talent that gives you 10% damage reduction when you Fel Blade, that can be used as an extra defensive when it comes to one-shot mechanics, and if you push into really high bleeding edge keys, thinking 17s or 18s, you might need to start using this defensively as well as your other buttons. It does also have increased self-healing when compared to Fel Scarred. This is due to the increased soul count from the souls that are generated through the talents that you are playing. However, while this is a relevant number, I don't think it's an incredibly big difference, as Fel Scarred will have Collective Anguish, so it does have some other self-healing based around your I-beam timings. So, and lastly, there is the damage profile is better with the same overall. This is when the spec is played optimally. This is playing it at the highest level that you can consistently in Mythic Plus, where you are using everything effectively on cooldown to generate the maximum amount of souls and doing your rotation fully correct. In that case, I find Aldrachi typically does similar damage to Fel Scarred in overall, but you have a better damage profile because in that overall damage, you're doing significantly more to the targets that you are choosing. If you're not playing the spec fully optimally, this will not be true. This is why, typically, the more I've thought about it, I'm leaning towards recommending Fel Scarred for players that are newer to the spec, or not fully comfortable on it, or people that just don't like playing Aldrachi Reaver, as you're likely to be doing maybe significantly more overall, or at least a bit more overall in keys, and if you're not effective at putting your damage into the correct target, then the funnel isn't necessarily always useful. There are pulls where funnel isn't useful at all, where every mob has the same amount of health, and there can also be cases like there are players that don't do things like set a focus and do a focus kick, and they're actually targeting the mob that they're kicking, so their damage is going into their kick target, not the priority mob. Things like that are not great for Aldrachi Reaver. Just to pull it up as well, there's Aldrachi Reaver weaknesses. As I mentioned, it's difficult to maximize the value. It's just hard to play. Compared to Fel Scarred, at least, it's significantly more difficult, and I do think it is a very hard class to min-max in Mythic Plus, with a lot of nuance to it, and it's not something that can always be explained because you have to be very dynamic with how you play the spec pull to pull, depending on routing and depending on dungeon. It has struggles with target swapping, because if you don't have your Reaver's Mark or you don't have a Reaver's Glaive ready, target swapping will be a significant damage loss, and if your target dies with your Reaver's Mark and you can't reapply, that is again going to be a massive damage loss, and you won't be generating as many souls, which will take even longer to get another Reaver's Glaive. You do have the issue of threat ripping on your priority mob unexpectedly. This isn't always an issue, but when you hit that empowered blade dance, especially in large AoE, a significant amount of damage gets funneled in. Sometimes you can have wounded quarry ticks as high as 15 to even 20 million damage, and that can just pop a mob from 30 to 40% threat to autoing you and killing you in one auto attack. Um, while this doesn't happen too often in my group's runs, this was an issue a lot more early on, and something I struggle with a lot more in pugs. Shadow Meld helps negate the issue quite a bit. Pressing Blur going into pulls helps negate it quite a bit, but it just is a problem, and there isn't really a fix for it. Lastly, combat downtime and deaths can cause significant damage losses due to soul loss. If you die as Aldrachi Reaver, you will lose your Reaver's Glaive and all of the souls that you are currently sitting on. I've had times where maybe I'm sitting on a Reaver's Glaive and enough souls for another 4 or 5 Reaver's Glaives, and if you die, you lose all that damage. And if you don't have the Hunt or Sigil of Spite up, it can be significant in your amount of damage that you will lose, because you won't even be able to get a new Reaver's Glaive to apply a Reaver's Mark to a target when you get back to the pull or get battle rezzed. The same issue with combat downtime. If you have unexpected downtime where you can't be in combat and generate a soul within 30 seconds, all of your souls will expire. You will keep your Reaver's Glaive if you do have one, so it's not as bad as dying, but this is something that comes up often, especially in dungeons like Theater of Pain, Start a Motherload, or in Workshop. Um, so that about covers Aldrachi Reaver. Next, I want to move over to Fel Scarred. Now, with Fel Scarred, let's start with the strengths. It has powerful 2-minute burst, metamorphosis resetting all your cooldowns, including both your immolation auras, means you can build up a lot of damage for a big pull, and it does really make a difference when we're planning out a dungeon, whether I'm going to be playing Fel Scarred or Aldrachi, as Fel Scarred something we can actually plan around, where metamorphosis as Aldrachi just isn't significant. It's easier to play than Aldrachi, and I think this is significantly easier, as well as not dealing with Reaver's Glaive itself or using souls as a resource. You have a larger Fury bar of 170, so Fury management is also easier, and you don't have Sigil of Spite talented. You have Collective Anguish, which is just extra damage when you I-beam. Taking out multiple buttons and multiple things to worry about, it really makes the rotation a significant amount easier, and I think that makes Fel Scarred, in a lot of cases, just a good starting point for Havoc Demon Hunter. It teaches you the base rotation, and then Aldrachi is kind of just an enhancement of what Fel Scarred does, with less burst on the 2-minute. I will note as well, Immolation Aura has an increased range due to the Flamebound talent, so that means you have a 10-yard range instead of 8-yard as Fel Scarred on Immolation Aura and Ragefire, and that makes your positioning significantly easier to get effective damage out of Immolation Aura. So that is something else that is significantly easier. It has passive defensive value instead of active. As Aldrachi, I mentioned, there's the Fel Blade, gives you 10% DR for 5 seconds. But as Fel Scarred, you have a passive 5% damage reduction that turns into damage that you take over time, or if it's fire damage, it simply deals 10% less to you. There's a good bit of fire damage in this season that this affects, and Set Fire to the Pain is just a good node defensively, especially in any key where you're not actually looking at being one-shot from max health. So I think that's something that's easier to play around because you don't play around it. It just works for you. With Fel Scarred, downtime has a lower negative impact on DPS. And what I mean by this is your downtime both in and out of combat. Think of a boss like Cujo in Workshop. When you go and sit behind the crate for 4 seconds, your cooldowns are just coming back. You send your I-beam and burst windows when you get back outside of the box. On Aldrachi, when you entirely stop doing damage, your Reaver's Mark is taking down and you are not generating souls. Aldrachi takes a significant hit in DPS on Cujo and bosses like that that have forced downtime for you, where Fel Scarred does not have that struggle. And of the two, Fel Scarred is the stronger AoE option. It typically will do slightly more overall, or in the case where, again, if a player isn't necessarily as strong, I think Fel Scarred will do significantly more overall than Aldrachi Reaver when it's not played quite as well, because it is so much easier and has less going on. This consideration is something that my group does thinking about Floodgate. It has a lot of large AoE pulls. There's not necessarily a prio target in each pull. In fact, most pulls don't have a prio target. I think our route has two that are like that, and one of them is entirely handled by our Elemental Shaman and Feral Druid, and that mob still dies first with me on Fel Scarred. Also, Fel Scarred Havoc Demon Hunter as Fel Scarred still has good priority damage. It's just not one of the best in the game because it doesn't have that funnel, but we still do a single target rotation more or less on a mob of our choice, and we do priority damage. So you don't entirely lose that, it's just not as strong. Next, let's go on to the weaknesses of Fel Scarred. So, outside of cooldowns, you have low AoE damage. Your damage is really carried by Immolation Aura and Eye Beam, which does your Collective Anguish, and then when you're in your Eye Beam window, you have your Demon Surges. Um, and that means when you're going into your actual Metamorphosis window, you're getting 7 different Demon Surges out, and you're resetting your Immolation Auras, and then you have your chance to get resets. So around your Metamorphosis is where you tend to see large amounts of Immolation Aura burst, and outside of that, the damage is just not as great. However, oddly for Fel Scarred compared to Aldrachi, Metamorphosis value flips. Because Metamorphosis resets all your AoE abilities and increases their damage values for Fel Scarred, in turn, they have a talent where outside of Metamorphosis, you both have increased agility, and Chaos Strike and Blade Dance do more damage. This means on single target, your empowered Chaos Strikes and Blade Dances, which would be Annihilation and Death Sweep, only do about 5% more damage, and you have less bonus haste when compared to Aldrachi. So Metamorphosis is a very powerful AoE cooldown, but less so on single target, even though it does have value. Next is Threat Ripping. Now, this is not quite the same as Aldrachi. Aldrachi has the issue where you'll unexpectedly rip the target you're hitting because you're doing a massive amount of burst to one target compared to the damage to the other targets. With Fel Scarred, especially with how many Immolation Auras you're pressing, if your tank has managed to not hit a couple mobs too much, or they've just only gotten like a tick or two of damage, it is very likely that your AoE can rip them. The best way to play around this is, especially when pressing Metamorphosis, be prepared to press your be prepared to press Shadow Meld to drop all threat on you if you are a Night Elf, or be prepared to press Blur just in case the target does swap to you so you are less likely to just die instantly. And lastly, there's no funnel, and there's less single target and priority damage. As I mentioned, it does still have good priority damage, and honestly, the single target's also good on Fel Scarred. It's just a little bit weaker than Aldrachi, within probably about 5% when we're looking at Mythic Plus builds. Um, and no funnel's not entirely the case. It has a slight bit of funnel in quotes. This is due to Ragefire, which Aldrachi has Ragefire as well, but due to Flamebound and Fel Scarred, Immolation Aura actually deals significantly more damage, specifically your critical strikes, and that 1-to-1 amps the damage of Ragefire. So if you have targets being pulled onto a boss, you will do more single target to the boss from the Ragefire damage that's going into them, and it's not a significant amount, but that is a little bit that kind of counts as funnel. So while these weaknesses exist, my personal opinion on it all is if you're not that comfortable with Aldrachi Reaver or you think you don't play it well, I would recommend trying and playing Fel Scarred. If you don't like it, you can always play either option. I think both are good. Personally, when it comes to keys right now, I play Fel Scarred in Operation Floodgate as well as Operation Mechagon. I know Mechagon sounds like a weird one as people think about it as largely a single target dungeon, but the priority mobs in the dungeon, typically there's only 2 pulls with 1 priority mob, and in our group we have enough priority damage to kill it when it needs to die anyway. And on the second and third boss due to downtime, I find Fel Scarred does similar or better overall. First boss is 2 target, on 2 target it's about the same. So your only place where you're really missing out on some damage is on the last boss. And when we're thinking about 5% loss on single target, we're talking a couple seconds of increased duration of the boss. And I think due to the advantages that it brings and the fact it's stronger on the other bosses, as well as things like the first pull, I think Fel Scarred is significantly better in Workshop. Fel Scarred could be played in many dungeons. I did play it in Theater of Pain for our 18 when Aldrachi was bugged. I wouldn't say it's better, but it feels like Fel Scarred is within just a couple percent in any given dungeon. And there's just some situations where you definitely would prefer it to be Aldrachi, but when it comes to anything outside of Bleeding Edge keys, I don't think this is necessarily a relevant consideration to make. So it's really up to you to play both and decide which one works for you. I've had a lot of people saying that Fel Scarred has been working for them, given the recommendation of trying it. A lot of people also just say, hey, I don't like Fel Scarred. It doesn't have enough going on. And I have people try it and go, hey, I fucking hate Eldrachi. I just want to play Fel Scarred. Whatever works for you is fine. Both of these builds are perfectly playable in every key level, and that includes all the keys that I'm doing at the top end as well. So that about covers everything that I wanted to go over and look at. Thank you for watching the video. If you like this kind of comment or content or anything else that I have made, please leave a like, maybe a comment to let me know what works and what doesn't, and I'd appreciate if you did subscribe to the channel. All the support I get has been helping me out immensely recently, and I appreciate all of it. For now, have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.